Well, hi, guys. Everyone having a good day at the summit? Hasn't this been amazing? The speakers have been incredible. And right now, I am lucky enough to be joined by my good friend, Chris Krebs. Chris, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi there, Chris Krebs. I'm the Chief Intelligence and Public Policy Officer for SentinelOne. That title is entirely too long, but it's not the longest title I've ever had. That was senior official performing the duties of the Undersecretary of the National Protection and Programs Directorate.
Can you say that again, please?
No. That's predecessor to CISA. So first director at CISA back, actually I've been out longer than I was in, which is a weird thing to say, but
that is a long, yeah.
Loving it now.
It's been a while. All right, so we have had a lot of talk about AI today. Opportunities, risks, what's coming, what should we be thinking about? And I'm keen to hear from you, given your role, not only from a government perspective, but the role that you do with SentinelOne of, we've been hearing a lot about the innovation, both from an opportunity perspective and the risks we're posing as we accelerate adoption. So tell me your thoughts on the proactive role it's going to play in both generating and neutralizing attacks. And when I think of organizations like Volt Typhoon, how are we going to see generative AI and AI in general start to really impact from a nation-state adversary perspective?
So as I think back over the last 10 years or so, AI, ML, deepfakes, those have always been kind of, I don't want to go as far as say cutting edge risks that we've been thinking about from a critical infrastructure and just broader ecosystem level of risks and associated concerns. But it certainly has accelerated since November, 23rd, 2022, yeah. With ChatGPT dropping. And I think that put both a public, a different set of public attention on top of it, rather than just sitting in rooms like this at Black Hat and DEF CON and other conferences. Now it goes mainstream. Now everybody's talking about the hype, the hype, the hype. But oftentimes I don't think the hype matches the reality, and it also manifests differently across the offense and the defense. My view right now, when you think about AI versus AI, is that the defense is winning. And there are a couple reasons for that. I think one is capital markets, and this is where we all get to cheer on capitalism, because between the venture capital community, private equity, and others that are rapidly and significantly investing in developing capabilities across a wide range of use cases that frankly, a lot of them don't work or they're not ready for prime time yet, but nonetheless, we are plowing money into it. We are seeing some leading edge capabilities that are actually working. And at the same time, when you think about the adversary and grouping it up between the set of threat actors that are state actors and then criminals, they have different kind of time to market themselves. What I think we're seeing in the state actor space, the security services space, is they are still messing around with their own use cases, trying to figure out what works. And earlier this year, Microsoft and OpenAI released some research on how they're seeing across their platforms the adversary using, and it's basic automation. So it's taking indexing the internet, using Shodan and other capabilities to really figure out where the bad stuff is, and then when the next vulnerability or CVE gets released, they know exactly where it is, where to go, what to hit it. We're seeing it for social engineering purposes, writing the better phishing email, mousetrap, whatever you want to call it, and improving the ability to get that stuff out there at scale and with great and significant speed. But I kind of look at it at the same time, and you mentioned Volt Typhoon. So Volt Typhoon, the Chinese PLA threat actors that have been all over domestic critical infrastructure and European and elsewhere.
They saved some about 5 years in some instances, correct?
We've seen these guys for a decade plus. I remember there was one instance in 2013. They were seen in a natural gas here in the U.S. a natural gas pipeline system, and they got in. They did recon, took schematics, and then pulled a Kaiser Soze. I mean, they just pulled out. You never saw them again, and really no idea what they were doing. Fast forward to today, and they've just been using basic living off the land techniques. They've popped a vulnerable edge device that in many cases, these things have been vulnerable with existing patches out there for 15 plus years. The patches have been available for 15 years. The edge device was not patched. So this gets to that adversarial use of AI right now. We're not seeing it yet because the old stuff still works. And so the last conversation, it's absolutely on point about, hey, quantum is whether it's 5 years out or 15 or 20 years out, I don't think about it that much, frankly, because I'm still working with companies trying to get them to deploy MFA.
Well, and you and I have talked about this a lot, to your point that we're still seeing the old stuff work.
Yeah.
And the adversaries, while it's working, haven't yet shifted 100% to AI. And this brings me to a point that we talk about a lot, which is you've had a ringside seat for a lot of years now on the front line of security. And, I think back at this conference a couple years ago and everything was zero trust, and it's a question of it's zero trust, zero trust, zero trust. And it became a buzzword. And AI is kind of similar. Everyone is saying at this point, oh, my services has AI, AI, AI. And the reality, though, is AI is a digital revolution. We are going to see changes in how we work, how we think, how we actually live because of AI. It's not just hype. And so, from where you sit, front lines of security all these years, how do we start to separate the fact from the fiction, the hype from the myth, as we really rationalize how AI is going to impact us both from an opportunity and a risk perspective?
We're not. It's just going to take a while. I think it's a better way to put it. This stuff doesn't
Great
happen
answer.
overnight.
We're not?
Look, okay, yeah, like the last minute, I'm trying to, I'll end this on a positive note, but it takes time, right? So everyone in this room is going to have some kind of conversation at a dinner, a bar, a party that said like, hey, what are you guys doing for governance on AI? Because my board, my C-suite told me that we are an AI-first company, which sounds remarkably similar to conversations you probably had in 2012, 13, and 14, where we are a cloud-first organization. The governance frameworks didn't exist then. Certainly the security controls and capabilities did not exist. So what happened back then? You had software engineers. They were taking code, throwing it up into an S3 bucket. What's happening right now? You have engineers that are taking a Hugging Face or other open source model, throwing it into some cloud bucket that's whitelisted or approved listed, and you don't have a CASB equivalent to monitor, to detect, monitor, and intervene on any of those activities. And I think one of the biggest issues that we're having, so when I talk to boards and all this, and the four key risk drivers that I tend to hear about the most, or the things that they're most worried about. First is the explosion of threat actors and their capabilities and their targeting sets are massively expanding. The second is the complexity of the enterprise. And particularly, as we move through COVID, the increasing reliance on third-party SaaS providers where you don't really have an understanding of what's happening on the other side of the fence. And third, relatedly, is the quality of code. We talked about first to market, the quality of code that's shipping out, and the lack of market interventions or incentives to truly set a higher bar, higher standard outside of government procurement actions. And then fourth and finally is we haven't really learned the lessons of the past. We're moving into the next generation or era of digital transformation, and we haven't really sat back and thought about, okay, what did we learn through this massive cloud move? What is Gen AI? What are the similarities here? So there are some controls and capability gaps that we have, and so when you again, come to Black Hat, you go to RSA or whatever, you really want to find those VC-backed firms that are doing really interesting stuff, that are going to give you an advantage to be able to intervene in those sessions rather than just using Zscaler to see what's coming in and out of your enterprise. Well, that's kind of where we are right now. But there are things that I think that are pulling together here at the event. But in the meantime, there are still a whole set of risks that we just don't fully appreciate, from privacy, security, regulatory, legal, business operations, brand and reputation, that I think the Federal Trade Commission and other regulators 3 and 4 or 5 years from now are going to have dockets and dockets full because companies accelerated, they moved too fast, they didn't fully understand what the models had access to, they didn't have the right data classifications and the fencing up, and all of a sudden, boom, you have confidential data, you have HIPAA-related data, you've got PII, boom, boom, boom. It is going to be I think it's going to be a really rich enforcement ecosystem.
It's interesting you say that, and I want to pause on that for a second because, to your point, organizations from an opportunity perspective use AI for one of two reasons. It's either brand differentiation or cost reduction in some way. That's kind of the two areas from an opportunity perspective we're seeing it really in layman terms. To your point, from a risk perspective, what keeps me up at night is exactly what you're talking about, which is the IP and the legal piece that we have just started from tip of the iceberg. Whether you're thinking about the Fuji's drummer, then the espionage case, the lawyer used ChatGPT on the closing argument, now all of a sudden the case is being thrown out. And then you have to also think about it from really the three areas of risk a board looks like from an AI perspective is you have reputational, you have operational, and you have legal. So when we look at a show like this, I'm interested in your expert opinion. What does good look like? Like, what do you think is exciting? What does responsible AI look like?
I mean, I think this gets to your point of it's the marketing piece. I think just probably every company or every vendor that's on the floor here has some sort of, we are AI powered, we are AI enabled, and I don't know what that necessarily means all the time, but I think it starts with the fundamentals. Again, like everybody's going to be going to the whatever after this event. You're going to talk to a peer. You say, "What are you doing on governance?" And it all generally looks the same. Frankly, it's task force. I call it kind of the McKinsey model, but you've got a task force. You've got a use case, and you have a process to vet. Vetting the internal use case of the AI technology. On the flip side of that, you've got the actual vendor tools and capabilities that we're talking about here. And I think the market is going to kind of let it shred out, do things work. I will say that SentinelOne, we do have an AI-powered threat hunting capability that I think does make it a lot easier. It does make it easier to do natural language processing on threat hunting inquiries. You're going to see more and more of those, and I think it just takes your hand, get your hands on it, proof of concept, and seeing what works. And if it does make it easier, and if you can, save a little coin on on your SOC analysts.
Okay, so I'm going to shift to a little bit of an elephant in the room. If I would be remiss having you on stage if we didn't turn to the 2024 elections. So today was an interesting day. Elon's been urged that his AI bots are spreading misinformation about the elections right now. Secretaries of State are asking him to take action on the X platform. Senator Schumer is saying that we're going to have AI legislation around deepfakes presented on the Hill in the next 2 weeks. And the Republicans are saying that they're going to try and revamp or change the AI EO that came out of the administration earlier this year. So AI and the election is front and center right now. What keeps you up at night about the elections? From a deepfake perspective, an AI perspective, what do we think we're going to see regarding AI and the elections in 24?
Okay, so just to tie this to the conversation, to the title.
Just a little bit.
Critical infrastructure
Critical
protection.
infrastructure.
2017.
Isn't an election a critical infrastructure?
Yes. So in 2017, DHS Secretary Jay Johnson designated election infrastructure critical infrastructure, which really does a handful of things. One is gives it access to expedited support and resources at the Department of Homeland Security. CISA ultimately runs that mission. I think Jen Easterly is going to be speaking tomorrow with a couple international partners on elections and the role that Gen AI has played. So for 2024, so on those things you ticked off, particularly on any sort of legislation that may be introduced in the next couple weeks, very, very unlikely that any legislation on AI gets passed before the election, or frankly, in this session,
or
even
in
lame
have any type of an impact on it.
Even even if you did pass that legislation, that would take some time to put into place from a regulatory perspective. and y'all will be hearing more and more about Chevron deference and overturning Chevron deference than you probably ever wanted to hear about. I myself want a full year of law school tuition back because that's all gone. That doesn't apply anymore. But on the AI executive order, now there's an effort to try to overturn some of the requirements. You pass a certain threshold of compute, and you have to inform the government of what you did to red team and that you have crossed that threshold, which to me is pretty basic. It doesn't seem that onerous. So I certainly think that we are fostering innovation here, particularly as it compares to what might come in the AI Act next January or so. But again, back to the 24 election and the use of AI, the adversarial use of AI, I'm not that concerned. I'm not. And so I told you I'd try to end this on a happier, positive note. I just think that the uses right now, and we've seen AI already, generative AI, come into the US elections in Moldova, Slovakia, Bangladesh, the UK, and elsewhere, Taiwan. It tends to be detectable very quickly, and it can be exposed and debunked very quickly. So New Hampshire, I think everybody probably heard about the robocalling that mimicked, said, don't save your vote, don't go vote for Biden right now. That was spotted, that was debunked at the national level, and then the Department of Justice was all over it, and they're investigating, and I think they have a prosecution underway. So those are the sorts of things that, yeah, they're going to spark, but they're not going to burn really hot and for a very long time. There are some limited exceptions here. There could be a point in time where there's a time-sensitive issue. Maybe it's the night before the election, so November 4th. Maybe it's the morning of. So where you can actually, change the time distance calculation on an election. But right now, it's not that big of a deal, I don't think. I think the bigger concern is down the road when you can use generative AI to do micro targeting, very precision-based targeting of individuals, and then you can do it at scale. And then you can wrap them in an information envelope that makes something that is very out of the mainstream seem to be the consensus. And that is one of the advantages of generative AI, both the development and then the dissemination of information. If you can do that in a really targeted way, it can really screw with people's heads and ultimately get them to a point where they change a decision or they change an action. But I do think that that's my hope, is that's not a 24 problem, that maybe that's a 26 problem. And ideally, we'll see that somewhere else before it happens here. But in terms of Grok AI pushing out misinformation or on ballot deadlines, I mean, these are problems that we've seen in other spots of the information ecosystem, and that's why for 2020 and then 22 and 24, there has been a concerted effort by election officials in the United States to direct voters towards trusted sources of information. Obviously, with hallucinations and other error rates and Gen AI capabilities, you don't want to go there first and last to get information that you're going to make a decision on. Go to the authoritative, the credible source of information, and in this case, on elections, it's going to be your state or local election official.
So tying this back to critical infrastructure, you talk a lot about the misinformation from an election perspective. We've seen now concerns about deepfake in financial services. We've seen concerns about deepfake even in health system. You talk about misinformation. So do you think the deepfake concerns that have been on the press regarding deepfake in the election are more hype than reality at this moment?
Well, I just think it's another facet of the broader information, the degradation of trust in the information ecosystem. It's just one, additional fuel on the fire. And even when you just think broadly about Russian disinformation efforts, for example. So Doppelganger is a group that's connected to the Russians. They've used these AI-powered bots. They've used ad networks. They use pink slime, which are just fake websites, Really, the idea is just to push as much content out as possible. But really, there's always this grain of truth. And so they're using our own existing flaws and seams and the rifts between us as society, which all exist. And they always will, they always have, and they always will. They are just pouring kerosene on what deepfakes and what generative AI allows them to do here. It just gets scale and quality improves. But this goes back to the same, you know, whether it was 20 or 18 or whatever before it, take a beat, take a breath, think about why you're getting amped up, and then validate. Now, I know that's asking a lot of people sometimes, particularly when, you know, the entire engagement incentive structure around social media is you know, content and volume and rapid consumption. Maybe you need to go check before you repost or you amplify. And again, sounds like a lot, and it's against the point of the entire platform. But I think for us, or at least the more discerning folks, it's always a good best practice.
So with 2 minutes left, 80% of critical infrastructure designated organizations sit within middle market. You've talked about lots of hype, still adversaries using traditional techniques. There's, you know, the question of what's real, what's not, where it's coming, what's going. What's your prediction regarding generative AI, AI in general, and critical infrastructure? Where are we headed the next couple of years?
So this is where, again, I think for where we are now in the first wave of generative AI into the market, the defense is still outpacing the offense. So I think we're in a good spot. We will get more Gen AI-powered capabilities into the hands of the good guys. The bad guys will continue to research, invest. They will catch up. But it will continue to be a cat and mouse game. And Rob Joyce, formerly of the NSA, said, he was on Pat Gray's podcast, Risky Business, and he said, it's all about speed. It's all about who's faster. Speed kills. So the more, you know, how we can improve mean time to detection, mean time to response, and mean time to mitigation, that's going to be absolutely critical as the bad guys figure out how to put this stuff into, you know, into their own production cycles. But also, I think making it so that we all have, you know, somebody sitting right by us, Gen AI, you know, whatever, that we, again, we can respond faster, we can stay on top of it, and we're just that much faster than the bad guys.
Yeah, and I think I would agree with you. The response and the understanding of fact versus fiction, what should we be really paying attention to, and how do we put that into our own operational resilience plans, that's going to be critical. With that, Chris, thank you very much for taking the time today. Appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.